All right, so you're officially a manager. Congrats. But if you're feeling even a little bit overwhelmed, you're definitely not alone, especially if this whole leading a team thing is brand new for you. That's why we're doing this deep dive today. You send over some material that just screamed leadership and resilience. So let's break it all down and get you feeling confident ASAP.
Yeah, it's a smart move to really focus on those areas right away. They're foundational skills for any leader, but especially when you're just starting out.
Absolutely. And the material you sent over goes right into some really interesting questions like what are some common traps that even seasoned leaders fall into? How do you actually build resilience, not just like the buzzword kind? And then how does all of this translate to your team really hitting it out of the park, really succeeding?
Well, one thing that really stood out to me was this idea of the accountability paradox. It basically says that victimhood and entitlement, even though they seem like total opposites, they can actually work together to completely undermine a team's success.
Okay. I'm intrigued, but I'm also a little confused. Victimhood and entitlement. I mean, those don't exactly scream dream team, you know. How do those mindsets even show up in a workplace?
Well, think of it this way. Someone with a victim mentality might constantly blame external factors for their shortcomings. So deadlines are unrealistic. They didn't get enough support. The system is rigged against them. It's never their responsibility.
Ah, yeah. I've definitely met that type before. But how does entitlement fit into this whole thing?
So imagine that same person, despite not really taking ownership, also feels like they deserve special treatment or rewards just for being there. That's where the entitlement comes in. It's that sense of, I deserve this promotion or this raise or this recognition, regardless of whether their effort really warrants it.
Okay, so it's like this loop they're stuck in. It's not my fault, but I deserve it anyway. Now that you're explaining it, I can see how that would be so toxic for a team. But what even causes this entitlement thing in the first place?
The material actually outlines 7 key factors, and some of them might surprise you, especially if you're newer to managing a team.
Ooh, okay, lay it on me. What should new managers be watching out for?
One major culprit is overly generous rewards or a lack of really clear performance metrics. So if your company culture is all about showering employees with perks and rewards without a strong link to actual achievement, it can kind of unintentionally foster this sense of entitlement.
So if I'm following you correctly, it's not that rewards and perks are bad in themselves. It's more about making sure that they're tied to tangible results and contributions. Otherwise, you're basically training people to expect rewards just for showing up.
Precisely. It's about setting really clear expectations from day one and making sure your team understands that rewards are earned, they're not just given.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What else should newer managers be thinking about?
Another interesting point the material brings up is the influence of social media. And, that whole instant gratification culture we live in now, we're bombarded with these stories of overnight success and, people becoming millionaires by the time they're 25. It creates this unrealistic expectation that success should be easy and it should be immediate. And that definitely bleeds into the workplace.
Oh, absolutely. It's like
Yeah.
everyone expects to be CEO in 6 months just because they saw someone on TikTok do it as a manager.
hmm
How do you even begin to address that kind of mindset?
It's about setting realistic expectations and helping your team really understand that real success, that's sustainable, that takes time and effort and consistent hard work. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And you know what, even those perks that we think of as positive things, like flexible work arrangements even, that can backfire if it's not managed carefully.
Wait, hold on. How can flexibility be a bad thing? Isn't that something that most employees actually want?
Oh, of course, flexibility is great. But the key is making sure these perks are seen as privileges that are earned by meeting expectations, not automatic entitlements. So if you're offering things like flexible work, make sure there are clear guidelines and accountability measures in place. You're trusting your team to manage their time well and deliver those results, not just do whatever they want, whenever they want, just because the company is flexible.
That's a really good point.
Uh,
So much of this comes down to setting the right expectations and making sure everyone's on the same page from the beginning. It makes me wonder how many companies out there are actually fueling this entitlement without even realizing it.
Yeah, it's definitely worth examining your company culture and the policies closely, especially as a new manager. You're in a position to shape the norms and expectations for your team from the very start.
So if we want to solve this whole victimhood entitlement problem, it sounds like the material is pointing to personal accountability as the key, right?
Absolutely. Personal accountability is the foundation of a high-performing team, and it's something you can start building from day one as a new manager.
Okay, I love that in theory, but for someone who's brand new to managing people, how do you actually build personal accountability within a team? Where do you even begin?
This source material actually gives us some really practical strategies you can implement right away. And it all starts with setting those crystal clear expectations we talked about. Your team needs to know exactly what's expected of them, what success looks like, and how their performance is going to be measured.
Right, so no room for ambiguity there.
Yeah.
What are some other tactics that stood out to you?
Feedback is another essential ingredient. And I'm not talking about just the once a year performance review kind of feedback. It's about creating a culture of continuous feedback where you're regularly checking in with your team, offering guidance, acknowledging their successes, and addressing any areas for improvement.
So it's all about open communication and those regular check-ins and making feedback part of your team's DNA. But maybe this is just me overthinking it because I'm new to this. How do you give feedback in a way that actually motivates people instead of making them feel defensive?
That's where framing comes in when you're giving feedback. Make it about the behavior or the outcome, not about the person. Be specific about what you observed the impact it had and what you'd like to see differently going forward. And don't forget, feedback is a two-way street. Be open to receiving feedback from your team as well. It shows humility and it fosters that culture of continuous learning.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah.
to recap, we're talking about setting those clear expectations, giving and receiving constructive feedback, and recognizing and rewarding that accountability.
Mhm.
It sounds like a solid recipe for a high-performing team. But what happens when, despite our best efforts, things inevitably go wrong?
That's where resilience comes in, and the material you sent over focuses on a really interesting concept, bouncing forward.
Bouncing forward. I like the sound of that. What's the difference between that and just bouncing back?
It's not just about surviving those setbacks, it's about using those experiences to learn and grow and come back even stronger. And that's a skill that you can develop in yourself and your team, especially as a new manager.
Okay, sign me up. How do we go beyond just weathering the storm and actually come out ahead?
The material actually outlines a framework of 6 stages of resilience. It's helpful to think of it as a journey. You can guide your team through helping them process those bumps in the road and emerge even stronger on the other side.
All right, I'm ready to embark on this resilience journey. What are those 6 stages, and what should a new manager be keeping in mind as they guide their team through them?
So the first stage is shock and response. That initial hit, when something goes wrong, your team might be feeling confused, overwhelmed, maybe even panicking a bit. Your job as the manager is to help them process that initial impact and get grounded.
Got it. So how do you actually do that? What's the best way to support a team when they're in that kind of shock?
Well, the source material has this great activity called grounding together. It's a simple but really powerful exercise where you lead your team through a sensory awareness practice, ask them to name 5 things, they can see 4 things, they can touch 3 things they can hear, and so on.
Wow, that's such a simple but brilliant idea. It seems like something that could be so effective in bringing people back to the present moment and calming all those racing thoughts.
Exactly. And once that initial shock starts to subside, you'll often see your team moving into that second stage, overthinking. This is where all the what ifs and the self-doubt start to creep in.
Oh, tell me about it. I'm a champion overthinker, even on a good day. How do you help a team break free from that overthinking spiral?
One technique I find really effective is what the material calls reframe the thought. Each person writes down a negative or self-critical thought they're having. And then as a team, you brainstorm more positive or constructive ways to reframe that thought.
I love that it's like taking that negative thought and giving it a complete makeover.
Exactly. And doing it as a group helps create a sense of support and shared learning. It shows your team that they're not alone in their struggles and that there are always more helpful ways to look at things.
Okay, so we've got grounding together for that initial shock and reframe the thought for overthinking what's next on our resilience journey.
The third stage is all about rebuilding confidence after a setback. It's totally normal for people to feel a bit shaken, maybe question their abilities or their judgment. This stage is all about helping them restore that sense of self-belief.
Confidence is key, but how do you help someone rebuild their confidence when they've just taken a hit, especially as a new manager who might not feel totally confident themselves?
The material suggests an activity called Strength Swap. It's simple but powerful. Each person writes down 3 strengths they admire in themselves, and then they pair up with a colleague and they share their lists. The partner then adds one more strength that they see in that person.
That's such a great way to shift the focus from what went wrong to what they're good at and what they bring to the table. Plus, hearing those affirmations from a colleague can be so powerful.
Absolutely. It's about reminding people of their value and their potential, even when they're feeling down on themselves. And that really sets the stage for the next stage, which is facing scrutiny.
Ooh, facing scrutiny. That sounds intense. What does that look like in a workplace setting?
It's about being able to handle questions, feedback, or even criticism in a way that's constructive without getting defensive or shutting down. It might involve dealing with like a postmortem meeting, having to explain a mistake to higher ups, or even just navigating those tough conversations with your team.
That can be a really uncomfortable experience, especially for a new manager who might not feel totally secure in their leadership role yet. How do you prepare a team for those kinds of conversations?
The material recommends something called resilience role play, which is basically exactly what it sounds like. You set up a mock scenario where one person plays the role of someone facing scrutiny while the others act as the questioners or the critics.
So you're giving your team a chance to practice those difficult conversations in a safe and supportive environment.
Exactly. And the key here is to provide constructive feedback throughout that role play. It's not about putting anyone on the spot or making them feel bad. It's about helping them develop the skills and the confidence they need to handle those situations effectively when they arise for real.
I'm noticing a theme here. Each of these resilience activities seems to really emphasize the importance of teamwork and support.
You're totally right. Resilience isn't just an individual quality. It's something that you build together as a team, and that leads us to that fifth stage, seeking support.
Seeking support. I feel like that can be really hard for some people, especially in a work context where they might feel pressured to appear strong and independent.
It's definitely a skill that needs to be cultivated, and it starts with you as the manager creating a safe and supportive space for your team. This stage is all about acknowledging that it's okay to ask for help, to lean on others when you're struggling, and to offer that support to your colleagues when they need it.
So it's about creating that culture of psychological safety where people feel comfortable being vulnerable and asking for help without fear of judgment or repercussions.
Exactly. One way to practice this is through an activity called empathy in action. Pair people up and have them take turns sharing a personal challenge they're facing while the other person just listens attentively, offering empathy and validation.
It's amazing how powerful simply being heard can be. And that kind of active listening can really strengthen those bonds of trust within a team, which is especially important for a new manager who's still building those relationships.
Absolutely. And once you've navigated those first 5 stages, you arrive at that final stage of resilience, finding closure.
Finding closure, that sounds like a very deliberate process. What does it entail?
It's about accepting what happened, letting go of any lingering resentment or regret, and shifting your focus to the future. It's about learning from the experience and using those lessons to grow and improve.
So how do you help a team reach that point of closure? What does that look like in practice?
One of the best ways to facilitate closure is through an activity called future focus. Have each person create a vision board or a list of what moving forward looks like for them. It's about shifting their mindset from dwelling on the past to envisioning a positive and productive future.
That's such a great way to end this whole resilience journey on a high note. You're helping your team look ahead with hope and determination rather than getting stuck in the negativity of what happened.
Exactly. It's about empowering them to take control of their own narrative and focus on what they can create rather than what they've lost.
This whole concept of resilience is so crucial for anyone in a leadership position, but especially for those who are new to managing a team. It's inevitable that you're going to face challenges and setbacks, but it's how you respond to those setbacks that will truly define your leadership.
And what's really important to remember is that even if you're implementing all of these strategies as a new manager, sometimes you're going to encounter situations where the leadership above you isn't exactly a model of excellence.
Ooh, that's a tough one. What do you do when you're trying to build this incredible culture of accountability and resilience, but your own boss isn't exactly leading the way?
That can be incredibly frustrating, absolutely. But here's the thing, personal accountability becomes even more important in those situations.
Wait, really? Why is that? It seems like it would be so easy to just throw your hands up and say, well, if my boss isn't accountable, why should I be?
It's tempting for sure, but the source material makes a very compelling argument for why personal accountability is essential regardless of what's happening around you.
Okay, you've piqued my curiosity. Tell me more.
First and foremost, personal accountability helps you maintain your own sense of integrity and professionalism. You're not letting the actions of others dictate your own behavior.
So it's about staying true to your own values and principles, even when those around you might not be doing the same.
Exactly. And secondly, personal accountability allows you to focus on what you can control rather than getting caught up in what you can't. You can't change your boss's behavior, but you can change your own actions and reactions.
That's such a powerful mindset shift. It's about taking ownership of your own sphere of influence rather than feeling helpless or resentful about the things you can't change.
Precisely. And finally, and this might sound a bit idealistic, but personal accountability can sometimes be a catalyst for positive change when you model that behavior consistently, even in the face of ineffective leadership above you.
Hmm.
You might just inspire those around you to do the same.
So you're almost leading by example, showing your team that accountability matters, even when it's not coming from the top down. And who knows, maybe your boss will eventually take notice and adjust their own behavior.
That's the hope. But even if they don't, you're still creating a more positive and productive environment for your team, which is what ultimately matters.
Okay, so we've established that personal accountability is super important, even when dealing with a less than ideal boss.
Yeah.
But for a new manager, what are some concrete actions they can take to lead from below in those situations?
The first and most important step is to simply set a positive example. Be the person on your team who consistently shows up, meets deadlines, takes ownership of their mistakes, and offers solutions instead of complaints.
So you're basically becoming the leader you wish your boss was.
Yeah.
You're showing your team what good leadership looks like, even if it's not coming from the top.
Exactly. And another powerful strategy is to foster a sense of collaboration and mutual support within your team. Encourage your team members to help each other out, share knowledge freely, and work together to overcome those obstacles.
You're creating that strong and supportive team dynamic that can help compensate for any lack of leadership from above. I love it. But, and maybe this is me being overly cautious again as a new manager, what if you feel like your boss's actions are actively hindering your team's progress? Is it ever okay to offer feedback upward?
That's a great question, and it's definitely a tricky situation. It can be done, but it requires a lot of careful consideration and tact.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me some tips on how to navigate that conversation.
Well, the first rule of thumb is to choose your timing wisely. Don't try to have this conversation when your boss is stressed or distracted or in a bad mood. Wait for a moment when they seem receptive and open to feedback.
That makes sense. But what about the content of the feedback itself? What's the best way to approach it?
Make sure your feedback is specific, objective, and focused on behavior, not personality. So instead of saying something like, "You're always so disorganized," try something like, "I've noticed that when we receive last-minute changes to project deadlines, it creates a lot of confusion and stress for the team. Perhaps we could implement a system for communicating those changes more effectively."
So you're not attacking your boss.
Hmm.
You're presenting a problem and offering a potential solution.
Oh,
You're framing it as a collaborative effort to improve things for everyone.
exactly. And remember, you might not see immediate changes, but by planting that seed and offering your feedback in a constructive and respectful way, you might just nudge your boss in the right direction. And even if you don't, you've at least demonstrated your own leadership potential and your commitment to creating a more positive and productive work environment.
This is all incredibly insightful, but I'm sure our listeners is eager to hear even more practical tips and strategies, especially for leading from below.
Absolutely. We'll dive into even more specific examples and actionable advice in our next segment.
So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll continue to unpack these essential leadership concepts and help you build the confidence and resilience you need to thrive as a new manager.
Welcome back to our deep dive into leadership and resilience.
We've already covered so much, but we're just getting started. Before we jump into the next layer, how about we do a quick recap of those key takeaways from part 1?
Sounds good. We talked about those two sneaky mindsets that can really trip up a team, victimhood and entitlement, and how surprisingly they can actually work together to sabotage success.
Right, and we explored how personal accountability is the antidote to that toxic cocktail. It's all about taking ownership, setting crystal clear expectations, and making feedback a regular part of your team's routine. But we also talked about how even the most accountable new manager can't always control what's happening above them.
Exactly, which is why we touched on the importance of leading from below, setting a positive example even when your own boss might not be, and even offering constructive feedback upwards when it's appropriate. And of course, no leadership discussion would be complete without talking about resilience, that ability to not just bounce back from setbacks, but to actually bounce forward.
Okay, so resilience is more than just gritting your teeth and pushing through tough times. It's about actually using those challenges to learn and grow,
Yeah.
which seems super important for new managers who are definitely going to hit a few bumps in the road.
Absolutely. And, one thing that's really fascinating is how organizational systems and processes, even those designed with the best intentions, can sometimes unintentionally work against resilience and accountability.
And now you've got me really curious. What do you mean by that? How can things like compensation benefits or even those fun perks actually backfire on a company?
Well, think about it. Generous compensation and benefits packages. It seems like a great way to attract top talent and keep employees
Yeah.
happy, right? But the source material you sent actually points out a potential pitfall here.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the catch?
If those rewards aren't clearly tied to performance, they can actually breed a sense of entitlement. Employees might start to see those high salaries and perks as a given, just part of the deal for showing up, rather than something they need to earn through their efforts and contributions.
Ah, I see what you mean. It creates a what's in it for me mentality without the emphasis on what am I bringing to the table. That's definitely not a recipe for a team that's motivated to go above and beyond.
Exactly. And it can also undermine a sense of fairness and equity within the team. If everyone's getting the same rewards, regardless of their effort or results, it can lead to resentment and a lack of motivation for those who are truly going the extra mile.
So what's the fix? How do you make sure that those rewards are actually incentivizing the right behaviors and fostering a culture of accountability?
It's all about alignment. Instead of just offering blanket benefits, try tying compensation to individual or team performance. Make it super clear that rewards are directly linked to achieving specific goals and exceeding expectations. You could even introduce things like variable compensation, like performance-based bonuses, where a portion of someone's pay is directly tied to their results.
So it's not just about how much someone is being paid, but how that compensation is structured and communicated. It's about transparency and making sure everyone understands that their efforts directly impact their rewards.
Exactly. And the same principle applies to things like recognition programs. Recognition is important, absolutely, but it needs to be strategic and meaningful.
Okay, I'm with you on that. I've definitely worked in places where it felt like everyone got a trophy just for participating. It kind of cheapens the whole idea of recognition.
Exactly, the source material cautions against frequent automatic recognition for things that aren't truly exceptional. Think Employee of the Month awards for just doing your basic job. It sets up an expectation that you deserve praise just for showing up, which doesn't exactly motivate anyone to go above and beyond.
Right, it's like those participation trophies we got as kids. It's nice in the moment,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really teach you anything about the value of hard work and achievement. So how do you make recognition more impactful and motivating in a work setting?
Make it specific and tie it directly to accomplishments. Did someone exceed their sales target? Did they single-handedly save a project from disaster? Those are the moments to really highlight and celebrate their contributions. Make it clear that recognition is reserved for those who are truly going above and beyond, not just meeting the bare minimum.
That makes sense. It's about quality over quantity when it comes to recognition.
Yeah.
You want those moments to feel genuine and earned, not just like a routine pat on the back.
You got it. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of those trendy perks that are so popular these days, like unlimited PTO and flexible work arrangements. These can be amazing benefits, but they also require a thoughtful approach.
Okay, I can see where this is going.
Yeah.
I've definitely heard stories of companies offering unlimited vacation time, only to find that people are actually taking less time off because they're not sure what the unwritten rules are.
Exactly. It's a classic example of how even well-intentioned perks can backfire if they're not managed carefully. The key is to make sure employees understand the expectations and boundaries around these perks. It's about trust, but it's also about maintaining a culture of accountability.
So with something like flexible work, it's not just about saying work from wherever you want, whenever you want. It's about setting those clear guidelines and
Yeah.
making sure people understand that the flexibility is meant to empower them to be more productive and engaged, not to just slack off.
Precisely, and the same goes for things like professional development and training programs. These are valuable investments, but they need to be aligned with performance goals and individual needs.
So instead of just offering a buffet of training options and letting people choose whatever they want, it's about being more strategic and making sure those training opportunities are tied to specific skills gaps or career development goals.
Exactly. You want people to see those training programs as a way to enhance their skills and advance their careers, not just as a free perk.
Okay, so we've talked about compensation, recognition, and perks. What about the big one, promotions?
Yeah.
That's another area where things can get tricky, especially if you're a new manager trying to navigate a company culture that might not have the clearest promotion guidelines.
Absolutely. If promotions are based solely on seniority or time served, rather than on demonstrated performance and potential, it can definitely create a breeding ground for entitlement.
Right, it's that whole I put in my time so I deserve to move up mentality, which doesn't necessarily translate to effective leadership or better results for the company.
Exactly. So it's crucial to create a culture where promotions are merit-based and transparent, establish clear criteria for advancement based on things like individual achievement, contribution to team success, and demonstrable leadership potential, and make sure those criteria are communicated clearly to everyone so there's no room for confusion or resentment.
It's like setting up a clear path and saying, here's the map, here's the destination, and here are the milestones you need to hit along the way.
Exactly. And the same principle applies to all those little perks and special privileges that companies often use to create a sense of status or hierarchy. Things like fancy office space, premium parking spots, the latest tech gadgets.
Ah, yes, the coveted corner office and the reserved parking spot. I can definitely see how those things could easily become symbols of entitlement if they're not handled thoughtfully.
Right. So instead of just handing those perks out based on seniority or favoritism, why not make them performance-based? Let people know that those privileges are earned through exceptional contributions and going above and beyond.
It's like saying you want that awesome new standing desk. Show me what you can do with it.
Exactly. And finally, let's talk about company-wide rewards like profit sharing or those big annual bonuses. These are designed to celebrate collective success and create a sense of shared ownership. But even these well-intentioned initiatives can inadvertently foster a sense of entitlement.
Okay, I mean, everyone benefits when the company's doing well, right?
Right. But if those company-wide rewards aren't balanced with individual or team-based incentives, people can start to feel like they're owed a piece of the pie regardless of their individual contribution. They might think, well, the company's making money, so I deserve a bonus, even if I haven't really done anything extraordinary.
So it's like we're all in this together, but some of us are rowing a lot harder than others.
Yeah.
How do you balance recognizing collective achievements with acknowledging individual effort?
Strike a balance. Make sure a portion of those company-wide rewards is tied to individual or team performance. That way people see a direct link between their effort and their reward, even within the context of overall company success.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where you're recognizing both the collective win and the individual contributions that made it possible.
It's about creating a reward system that's fair, transparent, and truly motivating. And for new managers, this is especially important because you're setting the tone for your team. You're shaping their expectations and their understanding of how rewards are earned and what it really means to be accountable for your results.
This is all incredibly helpful. I feel like I'm getting a crash course in building a thriving team culture.
And remember, even with the best systems and structures in place, things won't always go smoothly. That's why resilience is such a critical skill for any leader, but especially for those who are new to the game.
Right, and in part one, we talked about those 6 stages of resilience that a leader can help their team navigate. We covered the first 3 stages: shock and response, overthinking, and rebuilding confidence.
Okay, so let's pick up where we left off and dive into the next 3 stages: facing scrutiny, seeking support, and finding closure.
Perfect. I'm ready to round out this resilience toolkit. Where do we begin? Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into building that resilient and accountable team. And we've covered so much already, from those sneaky mindsets that can sabotage your success to the power of aligning rewards with performance.
And of course, we've been talking about those 6 stages of resilience, a framework for navigating those inevitable setbacks and helping your team come out stronger on the other side.
Exactly. We left off in part 2 talking about the importance of facing scrutiny, seeking support, and ultimately finding closure after you've had a really tough experience.
Right. So let's imagine for a moment that your team has just had a major setback.
Yep.
Maybe a project got canceled, a product launch totally flopped, or a big client relationship went sour.
Ugh, I can already feel the tension. Morale is probably pretty low at that point. And as a new manager, I'd be feeling the pressure too. What's the first step in helping everyone get through a situation like that?
Well, once that initial shock and all the overthinking have calmed down a little bit, you'll likely see your team moving into the stage of facing scrutiny. This is when the questions start flying. What went wrong? Who's to blame? How do we prevent this from happening again?
It's that moment when everyone's trying to figure out what happened and, let's be honest, sometimes protect themselves. It can be a really tough spot to be in, especially for a new manager who might not feel totally confident yet in their ability to handle that kind of pressure.
Absolutely. The natural human instinct in those situations is often to get defensive, maybe point fingers, or even try to minimize our own role in what happened.
But that just creates such a toxic environment where no one's really learning or growing from the experience, right?
Exactly. So the key to navigating this stage effectively is to shift the focus from blame to accountability and transparency.
Okay, I like where you're going with this, but what does that actually look like in practice? How do you, as a new manager, actually model that kind of behavior for your team?
It all starts with being honest and upfront about your own role in the situation. Don't try to sugarcoat things or deflect responsibility. Acknowledge your own mistakes, share what you've learned, and outline the steps you're taking to improve.
So it's basically about saying, hey, we messed up. Here's what happened. Here's why it happened. And here's what we're going to do differently next time. No drama, no finger pointing, just straight up ownership and a commitment to learning from the experience.
Exactly. And when you approach it with that level of transparency and accountability, it can actually help build trust and respect within your team. They see that you're not trying to sweep things under the rug or protect yourself. You're genuinely committed to creating a culture of continuous improvement, even when it's tough.
That makes so much sense. You're not just telling them to be accountable, you're showing them what it looks like in action. But I imagine it's still pretty scary for a new manager to step up and own their mistakes, especially in front of their whole team.
It definitely takes courage, but it's so worth it. And remember, you're not alone in this. Everyone makes mistakes, especially when they're still learning and growing as a leader. The important thing is to be willing to own those mistakes and use them as opportunities to get better.
Okay, so once you've navigated that initial wave of scrutiny and hopefully created a space for honest reflection and learning what's next in this whole resilience journey,
It's time to seek support. Even the strongest, most resilient people need a shoulder to lean on sometimes, especially after a setback.
that makes sense. But
Yeah.
I think seeking support can be really challenging for a lot of people, especially in a work environment where there's often this pressure to appear strong and capable all the time.
Absolutely. That's why it's crucial for you as a manager to actively create a culture where seeking support is seen as a sign of strength, not weakness. It's about normalizing vulnerability and encouraging your team to lean on each other.
So how do you actually build that kind of environment? It seems like it would take a pretty big shift in mindset, especially in those more traditional work cultures.
It does, and it all starts with you be willing to share your own struggles, ask for help when you need it, and model that behavior for your team. Show them that it's okay to not have all the answers, and that asking for support is actually a sign of self-awareness and a commitment to growth.
So it's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Mm-hmm.
You're essentially giving them permission to be human and to acknowledge their own limitations.
Exactly. And when you create that kind of safe space where vulnerability is accepted and even encouraged, it makes it so much easier for people to reach out when they're struggling. They know they won't be judged or penalized for asking for help.
And that can make such a huge difference in their ability to bounce back from setbacks, right? Because they know they're not alone. They have a team and a leader who genuinely care about them and want to see them succeed.
Absolutely. And once you've navigated those stages of facing scrutiny and seeking support,
Yeah.
you arrive at that final stage of resilience, finding closure.
Finding closure sounds like a very intentional process.
Mm.
What are some strategies that new managers can use to help themselves and their team reach that point?
One of the most effective ways to find closure is to shift the focus from dwelling on the past to taking action and creating solutions for the future. So instead of getting stuck in the what ifs and the should haves, ask yourself and your team, what can we learn from this? What can we do differently next time? And what steps can we take to prevent this from happening again?
So it's about turning that negative experience into a positive opportunity for growth and improvement. You're not ignoring the past, but you're also not letting it define you.
Exactly. And it's also important to celebrate the lessons learned, even if they came at a cost. Acknowledge the hard work and effort that went into that project, even if the outcome wasn't what you'd hoped for.
Because even in failure, there are valuable insights to be gained right. And it's important to recognize those insights and integrate them into your future decision-making.
Absolutely. And finally, finding closure often involves a shift in perspective. Instead of viewing that setback as a complete defeat, try to see it as a redirection. Maybe that project wasn't meant to be, but it opened up a new opportunity that you wouldn't have seen. Otherwise, it's about finding the silver lining even amidst the challenges.
That's such a powerful way to reframe things. It's about choosing to see those possibilities even when things are tough. And I imagine that kind of optimistic outlook can be really contagious for a team.
It definitely can, and that's really the essence of resilience, not just surviving those setbacks, but actually using them as fuel to propel yourself and your team forward.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from those sneaky mindsets to the power of aligning reward systems to the 6 stages of resilience. I feel like I've gained so many valuable insights that I can apply to my own leadership journey.
And remember, leadership is an ongoing process of learning and growth. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to face challenges, but it's how you respond to those challenges that will really shape you as a leader and define the impact you have on your team.
So True. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. What's one specific action you can take this week to foster a culture of accountability and resilience within your own team? It could be something small, like setting aside some dedicated time for regular check-ins, or it could be something bigger, like having that courageous conversation with your boss about a challenge you're facing. Whatever it is, make a commitment to yourself, to your team, to take that step forward.
And remember, you don't have to have all the answers. Lean on your resources, connect with other leaders, and just embrace the journey. You've got this.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We're here to support you every step of the way.